did a completely non-launch in further incident from my 79 left. So what's the point of this video then? Why do I choose to share some audio where everything actually worked out? Okay. Well, there are some really good lessons to learn from this, which I will share with you after this short message from my sponsor. I am so happy to have Brilliant as a sponsor on this episode. And Brilliant is an absolutely fantastic online learning platform with hundreds of courses and things, for example, about fundamentals of mathematics, physics, but also these brain puzzles where you have to kind of apply your knowledge, and when you come across something that you don't really understand, they have a really good experience for you to go down this. This was rated as a serious incident by the authorities when they were made aware. It led to a report, which I have based this video on. It kind of shows to the extent that the authorities were taking into consideration incidents where everything was fine, but nothing actually really happened, but where there were really important lessons. And of course, the main lesson here, when they were interviewing the crews, but especially the air traffic controller, was the impact that the pandemic has had on safety and the work within the aviation industry. The air traffic controller stated that they felt the onset of skill fade, which is what happens when you are not working much for a period of time. And that's something that we all in the industry can feel. Often as have 1.5 years, but we might not have known as much as we used to. And something that we have to be really aware of when we work with. Mistakes will happen. They always happen. But our vigilance and the way that we deal with these mistakes is what keeps the industry as safe as it is. So in this case, for example, I want to highlight a few things. First of all, the fact that the airline crew did question the clearance, right? They got a clearance. They didn't think that it was correct, they questioned it, and then the further error that happened was that the tower controller didn't understand that this was actually a questioning of the clearance, right? She didn't even respond as she should have done. But it was really good of the United crew to question it. They should have possibly questioned it even more. And from this report, the authorities said that instead of reading back clearance that you don't really understand, it is better to say confirm clearance, right? Not even reading back what you think you heard, just saying confirm clearance to force the air traffic controller to reissue the clearance from the start. That should both raise the awareness of the air traffic controller that okay, maybe I said something wrong, but it also will give a better picture of flying on what clearance actually is. So confirm clearance. Back in it.
Overnight delivers hot fresh in 25 minutes on average. Now. Meet the 3 eToro ISAs. Save with our cash ISA and get a market-leading boosted variable rate for 12 months. Or invest with a DIY stocks and shares ISA or a managed ISA and get up to £10,000 cash back. 3 great ISAs, and yep, all in one award-winning app.
Being caught inside of a thunderstorm is likely among the most frightening things that you can ever experience. No matter the size of your aircraft, you will be thrown around like a rag doll, and there's little that we pilots can do once nature takes over. This is why we do our absolute best to never have to experience that. It's also what makes this story so hard to understand. The 2nd of August 2005 was a nice and warm day in France. And all in some white curious clouds around as the captain of this story got off his train and started walking towards the massive tower building that was Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle was the main hub in Air France, as a flag carrier, and this captain's he had worked for them since his previous company, Air Inter, had been absorbed into Air France back in 1997. And initially, he had been operating the FS2020 family, where he had also been an instructor and check air. And after a few years, he had then requested to be transferred over to the local fleet, where he was offered a position 4-engine FS before 2001. After a while, that position was a stronger position in the A340 as well. But he kind of declined that, motivated by a will to get more experience in time crunch, which I knew was a very hard thing to do. He was very well regarded by his colleagues, who all said that he was very pleasant and nice to fly with, and the cabin crew adored him in his open, down-to-earth communication style. He absolutely loved his job, which his spotless training record also showed, and on this day he had accrued a total of 15,411 hours, which 1,788 of those flown the FS2020. So, in all respects, this was a performing pilot. During the last few years, he found himself feeling more tired than he was used to. He had done various medical checkups without finding any findings. Therefore, was still granted don't even rest confident between his flights. Because of that, his previous flight had been for 12 days before, so he now found those 42 flight ahead. According to his concern, he was now scheduled to operate his aeroservice until the estimated years suspension there in Canada, which was one of the longest and long amount of flights he ever suspended at the time. The team staff there were 2 pilots who were on that before, which is needed if the duty time was spent. But that was not the case here, since the duty was only supposed to be around 11 hours or so. Anyway, since the captain had been traveling from his home south of France, he had now arrived to the Air France pool about 3 hours before the flight was scheduled, meaning that he had much lengthy time available. About half an hour after the captain had checked in, the first officer had also arrived, and it turned out that the captain knew him from a simulated check flight that he'd done together earlier. The first officer had also worked with France for years, first as a cabin crew from 1985, and later starting in 1997 as a pilot. He also had a solid reputation in all management, strong as a fellow pilot, and had at the time of this flight a total time of 4,834 hours, just over 2,500 flown on the FS2020. The 2 pilots did this on the 3-flight briefing material, soon saw that there was a 30% chance of thunderstorms in the Toronto area later on. Because of that, they decided to take 3,000 kilos extra fuel. One found enable them to hold for around 12 minutes if they would use Niagara Falls International Airport as their alternate, which is what the flight plan suggested. This extra fuel also enabled them to reach several other alternates, which is a good idea when there are thunderstorms forecasted, since those storms can appear over a large area. So it's in any case, the weather in Toronto was great at the time. We're looking at a 30% chance of thunderstorms is not so I doubt that this fact increased the pilot's costs to any great extent. There were also tons of other issues that stood out, so they went over to the cabin crew and hit them on the B738 flight ahead. There were 10 cabin crew rostered for this flight, but as it later turned out, 3 extra cabin crew members were also traveling as crews on this flight. Something that would eventually turn out very, very I have never flown with a person, but they quickly got on very well as the briefing continued, and they started finding each other. Once everyone were happy with everyone was being done, the whole crew started making their way out towards their leaving Airbus A340 was waiting for them up by the gates. The Airbus A340 is a very large airplane. It's actually it's only used to the Airbus A340-600. So internships in China, so even create images and it was A340 almost the greatest also impressive 62% and the same thing and similar to the FS2080, the 340 also have 4 engines, but even though that's the case, it's always been known as slightly underpowered, but it's 4 CFM56 engine, is not quite providing as much oomph as we pilots would like. Anyway, this particular A340 was in good technical condition with no major overtaking items recorded in its tech log. When the pilots got into the cockpit, they had already decided that the captain was holding his pilot flying for departure, and that the first officer would then take over and fly the aircraft during the landing. The reason for this was that the captain wanted to get a takeoff in during his flight, likely to avoid having to get into the simulator later on.
Business card. You haven't won to this spent on it. You
Stop that.
it is.
You see, we pilots always need to have 3 takeoff and landings exceeding 90 days and to carry passengers, and for a long-haul captain with a limited roster, that could likely become tricky at times. In any case, the pilots soon proceeded with their normal setup whilst their cabin crew colleagues welcomed the 297 passengers aboard. One of the passive cabin crew members were then invited to sit in the cockpit during the flight, whilst the other 2 took their seats in the cabin. Once everyone was boarded, the total head count included 207 passengers, 2 pilots and 10 cabin crew members, making 309 souls in total. And as soon as that was actually confirmed, the giant aircraft started pushing back and started up its 4 the engines. The pilots then started taxiing out and holding point for the active runway, and at time 11:53 UTC, that's 13:53 local time, aircraft flight 358 took off from Charlie Ball runway 09 left and started navigating to the oceanic entry point for its Atlantic crossing. You see, the way these crossings are done is with the help of several predetermined oceanic routes, which are basically straight great circle routes spaced at regular intervals over the Atlantic. Every one of those routes have entry points, which are normally GPS-defined waypoints, where the aircraft needs to appear at the flight level time in order to provide separation between each flight and say route, since there is no conventional radar coverage in the ocean. Now, flight 358 had been planned to use tracking wrong with an oceanic entry level of flight level 350, and they were then planned to climb to flight level 360 at 4 degrees western longitude, and then finally flight level 370 at 60 degrees longitude. But before the crew had reached their flight climb entry point, they were then re-cleared to use the track alpha instead. This track was located further to the north, and on top of that, they were also told to maintain flight level 350 for the entire Atlantic crossing. And this meant a slightly longer flight at a lower altitude, which would eat into the extra fuel, but still need to be okay after the pilots had received a new operational flight plan for fuel. Due to the volume of flights using these Atlantic tracks, these type of reroutes are not that uncommon, but it is still important to keep this in mind given what is about to happen. The pilots continue to operate their flight according to standard operating procedures, and at time 17:16 UTC, they were allowed to climb up to flight level 360, which would end up being their final cruise level. And then as my colleague Jake spoke, let me guess, car warranty? Every day, companies known as data brokers are selling your personal information for profit. That includes everything from your birthday to your phone address, phone numbers, your online browsing habits, and even your social security number, which is why Jake gets bombarded by these sales calls, and why you probably do too. Don't ask me how, but this trade is actually completely legal, but that also means that you have the right to tell them to stop. The problem is that your data is probably right now spread across beneficial requests. When I sign up, it turns out that my data is being sold by over 150 different data brokers, which inconveniently quite often. It was super easy, and now I honestly don't even remember the last time I got a spam call. Hey, if you finally sign up, use my code to get 60% off by going to incognito.com/pilot and use the code PILOT. Seriously, just do it. And you can too. Thank you, company, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the flight. Now, as the crew continued their steady flight over the Atlantic, they had routine balance, like noting their progress and taking weather for their routes from alternate destination airports. And since the VHF radio coverage of the ocean is spotty, they did this using their aircraft communication addressing reporting system, ACARS, which uses both VHF and satellite data to transfer information. The new weather they received for Toronto included the actual observations, ACARS, but curiously it didn't include any updated forecasting or TAFs. And the reason for this was later termed as a coding issue with the ACARS request. It turns out that if the pilots went into their ACARS menu and just requested the weather, the ACARS would only look for something instead of TAF short, which is a slightly abbreviated version of the forecast. And since Toronto was sending out the full non-TAF system, instead of just responding TAF message. In order to get that longer format, the pilots would have to go into a sub-menu and order the specificity in which they could. Now, having said that, the actual forecast didn't change that much to the still the same kit, 30% chance.